Welcome to the Prep 2050 Survival Academy podcast, where we go beyond the preps. Today, we're going to be focusing more on those who are wanting to bunker indoors, whether it be their home in the city, out in the wilderness, or in a homestead that is kind of in the suburbs of civilization. Many of us have a shit hits the fan scenario that's differ from one another. Some might be as extreme as wanting to prep for the zombie apocalypse, where others are just preparing for another version of 2020 lockdowns. We're also going to dive into other uses for kombucha, like how it can help you in your garden and how it can also help you to create vegan leather. Today, Heather's gonna dive into all of that from Mad Scientist Kombucha. Go ahead and follow her on Instagram at Mad Scientist Kombucha. And if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe to this channel, as well as give us a thumbs up. And you can also find us on Instagram at prep.2050. And if you want to listen to this in a podcast audio only version, go ahead and find us on podbean.com/Prep 2050 Survival Academy. Now, without any further ado, let's get ready for the fuckery ahead. What is kombucha?
Kombucha is a probiotic beverage, gives your body good bacteria. It's essentially a fermented tea. So like yogurt's a fermented cream, kombucha is a fermented tea.
What advice would you give someone who wants to make kombucha for the first time?
So I would recommend doing some research on whatever types of ferments you've got going on in your house, because there can be some conflicting ferments. Like you wouldn't want to bake bread where you're making kombucha. So if you bake bread all the time, that yeast that is used to make bread will make your kombucha alcoholic, and will also change the flavor of your kombucha. So you would want to say, okay, if I make bread a lot, I need to put my kombucha in a different place. So do research on the different types of ferments that you already have or what you've already got going on in your kitchen. I would say keep things clean. Even if you really, really, really wash your hands, if you're touching the actual culture, you're going to want to wear gloves. Because you can make your culture sick. And when your culture becomes sick and you consume it, you can become sick. So definitely keeping things clean. I would recommend taking notes throughout your process, because you're going to find, okay, I like the fermentation at this number of days for the first fermentation, this number of days for the second fermentation, just so you can go back to it and say, okay, this worked and this didn't. Kind of like whenever you're perfecting any other type of recipe, you're going to want to keep tabs on what you're doing that you like and what you didn't like.
That's interesting that you say taking notes and stuff, because I remember in college when I had to take like general science, the instructor would be like, make sure it's always in pen. Like, Lord forbid it's in pencil. And so you mentioned notes, and it's just like a flashback of my professor being like, it has to be in pen.
I actually do kombucha classes, and in the back of the little book that I get, there's a workbook that has sort of like a lab notebook kind of going with the Mad Scientist theme, for you to take those notes as you're seeing what works for you and what you like.
And it is smart. I think a lot of people don't, and I'm guilty of it as well, but just with all things, right? I don't always take notes. Like, for example, I do pickles and sauerkraut, and I don't take notes on the exact measurements for things. So sometimes I'll open a jar and I'm like, ooh, this is really good. And then other times I'll open it and I'm like, I mean, it's not horrible, but compared to the last jar I had, right? So
how much chilies did I put in that first one?
Exactly. Yeah. And then I'm just like, oh. And then my husband's like, you're hiding the good pickles from me. And I'm like, no. But I liked how
yeah.
It's interesting that you said with bread making, it will turn the kombucha into alcohol. So I'm not advocating for people to do that, but I am curious. In as far as like cross fermentation, is it like it cannot be in the same kitchen, or do you just have to be more mindful?
So, rule of thumb is you're going to want it at least 10 to 12 feet away.
Mm.
Personally, if you're wanting to keep things from cross-contaminating, I prefer to put them in a different room.
Mhm.
So, say your pantry might be safe, or if you've got an air-conditioned laundry room, or it might have a counter in your dining room, just to keep them as far apart as possible.
And then with the yeast, I guess, is it travel through the air or is it just other ways of contamination? Oh, so it's like COVID except for your kombucha.
There's this whole rabbit hole I could go down as far as like when you're smelling food cooking, it's actually the food molecules floating around in the air. Like there's more airborne than you can possibly imagine.
Yeah, I was talking to, because my mom cannot cook for the life of her. And but I can. So my husband's like, "How on earth did you learn how to cook?" And I was like, "Well, through my mom's horrible cooking. I love my mom. She's great at a lot of things, but cooking is not one of them." So through her horrible cooking, I learned the skill of cooking, and it was just by the smell. Like I could, like my mom would make us mac and cheese, and she would put both tuna and hot dogs in it, which you can't smell, but it just doesn't go. Um,
Right.
but
You
I
can do tuna or you could do hot dogs, but I wouldn't do both.
exactly, you can't do both. So my mom didn't eat that, and so she didn't know that. And I was like, someone told me it's probably because she can't smell, like she just smells the tuna. And then that's when it was like, oh, and so I would start smelling things, and that's how I got decent at cooking. My husband's been stuck with it for years, so he doesn't know any different.
I'm a sniffer. That's the other thing about kombucha. It smells different than it tastes, though. And so
Mm.
it can be misleading because you can smell the volatile, I say volatile acids. It sounds scary, but it's not. It's acids that are already sort of evaporating into the air that you can smell, but they aren't as strong in the actual taste.
And so, can you smell, like, since you've been doing this for a while, can you smell at about when your kombucha is at a liking that you like?
So I do use a lot of tools, pH meters, pH test strips, things like that, a Brix reader. So I do verify, but I have gotten pretty good at that. I can smell when it's ready.
And then you just pull out the test.
Yeah.
What is a SCOBY, since we're talking more into the kombucha-ness of everything?
So SCOBY is the word SCOBY is sort of an acronym. It's SCOBY. It's a symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast. So it's sort of just they call it the mother, the mushroom. My husband says it looks like a blob of fat. He absolutely will not touch it. Uh, he'll carry the heavy pots. He'll help me with the tea. He will not touch the SCOBY. But it's a mass of bacteria and yeast that uh, you'll put into the kombucha whenever you're starting the first fermentation. And that's the mother that reproduces. A lot of it goes into the kombucha, obviously, and then it'll also make another solid baby. So you end up with the mother and the baby. So you have two scobies at the end of a batch of kombucha.
I My friend gave me some of her SCOBY and I put it in my grandma's fridge for the time being because that was in California and I had to fly back. Um, and my grandma opens her fridge and she goes, "What is that in my fridge?" And I was like, "Oh, it's a SCOBY." Mind you, my grandma doesn't speak English, so I'm explaining it to her in Spanish. And I don't know how to explain this to her in Spanish because I've never had to use it in Spanish, right? So it was so funny because she's like, "What is a SCOBY?" And I was like, "It's an animal for tea." And she's like, "What?" She's like, "You have this like sea creature in my fridge?" And I was like, "It's not sea creature, but it lives in water. I don't, it's living." And so then Like that's like the running joke now is that I'm not allowed to bring home animals, living
Put them
or
in her
dead.
fridge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it made it home and I made a batch and it was a pretty disgusting batch and that's that.
Um, so a lot of people think that, or I see on the internet whenever I did a lot of research before I started making kombucha myself, that you can store the culture in the refrigerator.
Mhm.
You're going to lose a lot of the bacteria. So what might have happened is you lost a certain bacteria and yeast in that particular profile, because some aren't going to make it through the refrigeration process. They really like room temperature for the most part. So that might have been it. It might not have been anything that you did. It could have just been the culture didn't like to be refrigerated. But I mean, in some cases where like you were going to be gone for a long time, you're not going to ask your grandma to feed your animal on the counter.
Yeah, she didn't want to touch it either.
Um,
She touched it in the bag and she was like, I'm okay.
so I mean, in some cases that's pretty much your only option. But it might not make it the same way in the end.
I mean it did make the baby.
Hmm.
So I have a SCOBY hotel, I think. I'm pretty sure they're all dead, but I tried. I was a horrible hostess. So I guess that leads to the next question, which is how do you keep a healthy SCOBY hotel?
Uh, First you got to feed it. Um, Room temperature is best if you're wanting to preserve the ratio of bacteria and yeast that you particularly have in that culture. You want to keep it where it's always wet. So you don't have to just do one jar, one SCOBY. I generally have between 10 and 15 SCOBYs in a jar in my nursery. That's where I store the babies. I actually have it labeled nursery. So in each SCOBY hotel, there's about 10 to 15, and it'll have some seed tea in there. If you're wanting to be more conservative, you can go with less, but I go through a lot more in my production process than someone would in their home. Maybe if you're making it at home, maybe keep it around 5 or 6. You'll want to keep sufficient seed tea in there, and about every 2 weeks or so, if you aren't touching that hotel, throw some sweet tea in there to keep them eating.
And how often would you use one of the layers of SCOBY? Is it just that one time and then you take the baby, or how does that work?
So I judge the mother on how well she performs. Um, if I notice that this culture isn't producing a good baby, it goes into my archive jars. I have a lot of different uses that I use for the scobies once they're no longer kombucha material. But you can look at the color, you can look at what pH that jar will make. When things just are starting to not quite get right, it's time for her to be retired.
And what are the other uses for the SCOBYs besides just the kombucha?
You can compost them because while they aren't an appropriate ratio of bacteria that you'd want for your profile in kombucha, it's really great in the garden. It'll help break down your compost. There's recipes for fruit leather where you can put, say, strawberries or raspberries, whatever type of fruit you like, in a blender with the SCOBY and grind it all up. And then you put it in a thin layer on a cookie sheet and you essentially dehydrate it in your oven. You can cut it into strips and it's like a fruit leather. I've even seen some people that make leather out of the scobies. So it's like vegan leather. One place I saw where they made like change purses out of the scobies.
That That's I know that you said that in the email, and I found that to be the weirdest thing in the entire world. And I just still don't feel like it's vegan because it's the animal that lives in my grandma's fridge when I want to play jokes on her now. So,
So a lot that was my first question I asked whenever people were like, "Is it vegan?" I'm like, "It's alive. I don't know, but it does not have a central nervous system,
oh, is
so
that
it's
what the
vegan."
cutoff is for
Yes,
veganism?
that's what I've been told.
Interesting. That is so interesting. So I guess I mean like the scobies that I have are like about that round. I cannot, I mean, I have some that I'm like 90% sure are dead. So I don't know. Maybe I will get creative and do it and then bring it to my grandma and then just really creep her out for Halloween.
Change first, Grandma.
Yeah. I'm just trying to, and I need to Google it. I haven't Googled it. I'm trying to just like imagine what it would look like, how practical it is. Because I mean, like touching the SCOBY, it's thick.
Mhm. Well, if you dehydrate it, it would get thinner, right?
But is it strong? That's the question.
So it depends probably how thick the SCOBY is.
Because the
I'm
fruit
always
leather,
curious. I go through mine a lot. I think I might give that a try.
right? Just out of curiosity, because now I'm curious and I might go take my dead scobies. My husband's gonna kill me, but you know.
I'm always looking at alternative things to use for stuff. I mean, this is a prepper company you have going. It's an alternative use for some of the things that you might have around the house that maybe a dehydrated SCOBY would work for.
And I mean, exactly, in an instance where all the cows are being died off by the sun or what have you, and you have no leather, this might be an interesting alternative. Now I'm like legitimately curious. I think I'm gonna, you know what? I'm gonna do a whole new YouTube episode just on me figuring this out.
I can't wait to see that.
That's so interesting. And I do leather work too. So I have like all the tools for
Oh, so
sewing.
you have the tools to do that.
I have the tools. I've just been non-vegan about my leather work. That is so interesting.
I'm curious how it'll all work out. I mean, there are companies that do it. I don't know. It's another one you'll want to take notes on your dehydration process.
Right? Exactly. That is so interesting. Oh my gosh. So with the fruit leather though, like I said, to me that makes sense. And
Mhm.
I remember us talking about it when I last saw you that I used the SCOBY in my compost with my worms.
Mhm.
So I didn't know if you tried because I knew you wanted to do worms. I don't know if you started that or where you were at with that.
I'm getting their worm house ready. Because from what I've read, you've got to kind of get it started for them, and then they kind of take over after that.
Yeah.
I don't
So
want to kill my worms.
no, it sucks because I haven't purposefully killed my worms. I just didn't when we were moving, they died unfortunately, so I'm like restarting. But luckily I have all the soil that they made. So even though everyone was freaking out about fertilizer, I was okay. So now I'm starting it again, which is that was my plan for my dead scobies. But I now have
Mhm.
more plans. We'll see how the leather goes. I'm really curious. I'll make a coin purse.
There we go.
Do you have, so with that said, do you have any tips on red flags for buying scobies online? Because I may have to buy a new SCOBY.
I don't get paid by this company. They probably don't know I exist, but I like Kombucha Camp. Camp with a K instead of a C. Um, they've been around for a long time. They started out essentially just selling kombucha, making kombucha, then selling kombucha. And then they realized, I love their story. And then they realized they could help more people by educating people. They've got tons of resources. Any kind of article you could possibly think, use them like Google. Any question you might have. That was one of my biggest resources when I first started making kombucha. They sell scobies as well. You can get some from Amazon. You can get them from other places. I would recommend making sure that there's good reviews. Depending on where they're coming from and where you are, what the temperature of the transit is, because it doesn't work being refrigerated, and it also doesn't work getting really hot. So you want to pay attention to the time of year you might get scobies as well, and how far they're having to travel, because it is alive and you don't want it to get too hot or too cold. How long the company's been around and reviews, kind of things like that.
Typically, is there a risk if you're getting a SCOBY from like you mentioned earlier that the SCOBY might be sick or whatever? I guess, would there be signs that a SCOBY is sick, or you would just find out because you would get sick?
So for the most part, you can tell. It'll be, well, if there's mold, that's probably something that that you did as far as not having the appropriate pH, or if it got too cold. Sometimes too cold will make mold. Sometimes there's like a white film. Sometimes there's dark spots. If anything looks suspicious, you'll want to remove that one. Once you start making kombucha, you're going to end up with extra scobies just through the process. They will take over your kitchen. That is one of the things, if you don't have the use for your other scobies. My poor husband. He was so happy whenever I decided to make kombucha to sell, because at that point it's not a cottage food item. In order to legally sell kombucha to the public, it has to be in a commercial kitchen. And so we got our counter space back. They all went to the commercial kitchen. I like the commercial kitchen because it's got the giant sink. But if you have any doubt of anything looks suspicious on your fermentation or your SCOBY, dump everything and start fresh.
And do your scobies stay in the commercial kitchen, or do they still come home?
No, after I started making them, making kombucha to sell, everything stays. I bring made kombucha home, but everything stays at the commercial kitchen.
So he's just going to be curious as to where these fake leather coin purses are coming from. And then he's going to say, no, they still stay in the kitchen.
Well, he goes to the kitchen with me as well, so he sees everything.
So he'll see where that comes from, and then he'll just say no. That's funny. What are the probiotics that go into the kombucha, and how do they? I know I'm not supposed to ask double barrel questions, so I guess here I'll stop myself. Tell me about the probiotics that kombucha offers humans.
So there is two different types of bacteria. I actually did a little, I know them, but I don't know the names off the top of my head. So I looked it up again. There's acetobacteria, that makes the acetic acid and gluconic acid. And so there's different bacteria that thrive in the first fermentation versus second fermentation. And the first fermentation is the aerobic. That's where it's open. So essentially, that's whenever you're making the kombucha and it has just a cheesecloth over it. I like coffee filters because they breathe better with a rubber band. So it's open. And then during the second fermentation, when you close it, that is the anaerobic. So different bacteria grow there. So you're looking at more acetobacter for the first fermentation, Pediococcus for the second fermentation, You've got different yeasts. There is some Saccharomyces, that's the bread yeast. There's going to be some, you just don't want a lot. That's why you'll want to keep your bread making separate from your kombucha making, because it's already in there. It'll grow more, and that's where it can become alcoholic. The most common, what's known for kombucha, is called a Zygosaccharomyces. That is the kombucha yeast. That's one of the yeasts that is also found in your gut, but is primarily what you're going to see different. You're not going to see that in any other ferments. But there's a different bacteria and yeast. There's around 14 different strains generally found in kombucha, and it'll vary from person to person depending on, like I said, if say your culture got refrigerated and some of the bacteria didn't make it, that profile is going to change in your next batch, and then it's going to stay in that batch, and it'll just change over time. So different ones.
And as far as your batch, since you're doing it more commercially, how do you try to keep your scobies healthy to keep those profiles similar?
I do small batch. So whenever I first started making kombucha, I did the half-gallon jars. And when friends and family convinced me to sell this, I thought, okay, if I'm selling this at a farmer's market, I'm making 5 gallons, 10 gallons, 20 gallons, 30 gallons. I'm not going to do this in half-gallon jars, right?
Mm-hmm.
I moved to making the larger jars. The flavor changed. So I actually still make it in half-gallon jars. I just use lots of jars. So I inspect every half-gallon jar. And if, like the sniff test, you can tell as you're working with it, if the pH changes. Those are things that can tell me, okay, this bacterial profile is probably not right. This is whenever I'm going to retire that mother and not use that jar.
That's interesting. So everything is in half gallons, and then you just dump it in the big containers for like actually pouring to serve. Because I feel like I've bought half a gallon from you before.
Well, so to keep it refrigerated, I'm not bringing a refrigerator with me. We like the igloos. They only stay in the igloos during the time that we're at the farmer's market. We use ice bottles to keep everything cold. We used a bunch of different types of containers over the years, but the good old-fashioned orange igloos keep temperature, and they last a long time. So they'll transfer into those, and then they'll go back into the jars whenever we get back to the kitchen, if we have anything that comes back.
I remember one time when I was buying the basil strawberry kombucha, which was absolutely delicious. I think it's one of my favorite flavors. You mentioned that if people drink it too fast at first, it could cause some bowel movement issues.
I word it at the market because it's a way to be funny, but also get my point across.
Yeah.
And tell people that because I do a longer first fermentation to help balance the acids, it also makes the culture count larger than grocery store brands. So if you're used to drinking grocery store brands, or this is the first time you've ever had kombucha before, you'll want to start small, because if your body's not used to a strong probiotic, it can initially have a cleansing effect. And usually people are like, don't drink the whole jar.
And it's hard to. So you make it hard on people.
Now, the more kombucha you drink, the more you can drink. It's as your body becomes, you're used to the additional bacteria, you can drink more. I drink a lot more than I tell people, because I know people are going to do what they want to do anyway. At least I've given them the warning. It's one of those things like there's 2 servings in a can of soup. Nobody's going to split a can of soup this big. No. So it's one of those things. I kind of just throw that out there. You're not going to want to drink this whole jar. Recommended serving size is 4 to 6 ounces. That's also what the FDA recommends as a serving of kombucha is 4 ounces.
And again, that's just because some people, they can't go hard and they end up going home. And so the FDA is just kind of like, slow it down.
That actually came about because there, for a while, there was this trend where people were like, okay, we're not going to do soda anymore. We're going to just drink kombucha. Well, if you have, I don't know, 12 plus sodas a day, that's already not good for you. You switch that to 12 plus kombuchas in a day, it's going to shift your pH. Everything in moderation. I mean, too much water can also shift your pH. So it's not just that kombucha is, bad for your pH. Anything that you drink that much of can shift it. And so that's when the FDA put in okay, well, this is our recommended serving.
So basically calm down.
Yes. Moderation.
Talking about those leather scobies.
Yes.
It's interesting that you're mentioning, off the record that you wanted the alpacas because most people, so I'm Peruvian, and alpacas and llamas come from Peru. Most people are like, oh, llamas, and you make llama wool, but they don't realize that alpacas have softer wool. So I'm happy that you know that.
Yes, alpacas are smaller and they eat less and they make softer wool.
So they just have
they're cuter than llamas.
Do they spit as much as llamas or do they spit less?
They still spit, but they're not as aggressive. They're more docile than llamas.
Oh,
Llamas are kind of the boss animal. Alpacas are more docile. They don't care if they're alpha.
I've never had an alpaca or a llama. I've seen them in person, but I've never had one. So.
Goals. I'm hoping next year. Hoping.
I'll definitely have to come over then and see your alpaca, and then we'll make leather. So I did go grab my
nice.
scobies.
Yeah, that would definitely make some good coin purses.
They're definitely dead. So I've come to the conclusion that they're done. I did not mean to murder my scobies, but unfortunately, my animals have ceased to exist.
It happens. I've killed many a plant on my gardening journey. It happens.
And there's no way to try to revive them.
The scobies?
Mm-hmm.
No, because it's a mass, and in that mass is where all the bacteria and the yeast live. You wouldn't be able to inject or get more bacteria in it. It's better to compost it, make coin purses out of it, and then get new scobies.
What I was looking, let me see if I can share my screen because that would be cool if I could. Can I? Oh, I think I can. So like this is apparently all.
Oh,
yeah.
Floating out of it. Those are giant scobies. Mine would be like a stitched together quilt.
That's what I'm saying. And there's apparently you can buy these. It's a whole thing.
Nice.
I just found it. Exactly. I found it so interesting. Apparently, it's sustainable leather. So, I don't want to hear it from people. Us preppers, we're paving the road for sustainability, okay? We are saving the earth.
One SCOBY at a time.
Exactly. One SCOBY at a time. Oh my gosh, that has to be oh wow.
That's a giant SCOBY. So the big vats, whenever commercial companies are making kombucha, they're doing it in these big, either glass lined or stainless steel vats. Kind of like whenever they're making beer or wine.
It can't be
That's
plastic.
how large the scobies are. Is he wearing gloves? He's not wearing gloves. But I guess if you're already making it into leather at that point, maybe he's not making kombucha in that picture. Maybe he's making the leather, and it doesn't matter if you're wearing gloves.
I assume so because he's doing it in a plastic container, right?
Yeah, maybe they're doing some type of treatment to it. Hmm.
So I was gonna,
Now I really want to make this.
with your mothers that maybe aren't producing the right pH, you just put them in a square container, a rectangle container, and then that way its job is to make,
Oh, yeah.
rectangle or square
Kind of
mothers.
like whenever they do the watermelons where they put the container around the watermelon and it makes square watermelon.
Yeah,
Hmm,
I don't know.
that's a
Things,
really good idea.
right? Things that, I mean, I might buy a SCOBY just for, my husband will kill me, but he doesn't have to know whatever I hide in our storage. Like, it's fine.
He might just get a Scoby leather jacket for Christmas. Hey,
And he never has to know that it's not leather. He would never have to
right.
know. Do you know if
Some of these look
plastic,
really good.
right? I mean, I don't know if I'm that good. Here, kombucha culture leather. Oh my goodness. He rides a motorcycle too, so
Yeah, there you go.
that is so,
That
yeah,
is
here,
awesome.
I'm assuming it's the same guy because it's the same container.
That is awesome.
Well then, I'm excited. We learned something together.
Yes.
Does the container being plastic make a difference as far as like growing scobies?
Probably not, as long as it's a BPA free. There's certain plastics that are like acid resistant. If you're not eating it because the problem with plastics is certain plastics can leach the chemicals into the foods. Um, Also ceramic. You wouldn't want to make kombucha in a ceramic because it can pull the leads and metals out of ceramics. But if you're not drinking it, probably wouldn't harm the culture. Probably.
That's interesting that it would pool the hard metals from ceramic. I would never think of that.
Yeah, you never want to put something acidic long term in ceramic because the acids it'll wick it out.
Because I know people make sauerkraut in crock pots, not like the heated ones, just the pot itself. I don't know the pH of sauerkraut. I just make it until it passes my sniff test and then I eat it. Um, does sauerkraut not get as acidic? Do you know?
It might not get as acidic, but usually they're glass lined ceramic. Like if you're getting something that's an actual uh kraut pot, they're usually glass on the inside.
Oh, see, I don't know because I just use these jars for my sauerkraut as well. So
I mean, most people use glass jars.
yeah, it makes life easier. I can see what is in it because I make my own vinegar as well. So
Mm-hmm.
that's if it's in glass, I see it. I see the bubbles. I get excited. My scobies have one bubble, and I'm disappointed. It's its last breath.
Don't shake it. Don't give extra bubbles.
Yeah, I haven't. I can't shake it. There's not much, but oh, see, now that I'm like putting it in the light, I see some things moving. but I've been trying to revive it because this is the one that started in my grandma's fridge, and I've been neglectful apparently. I'm a bad host. I didn't feed it. It's my fault. Don't stay at my hotel, you won't get fed.
Um, the key is to make sure you have the appropriate pH to get it started so it won't mold, and give it extra sugar. You won't be drinking that first batch. So you could use, say, a distilled vinegar to make the pH appropriate and then extra sugar. That's actually a process that I do whenever I make coffee kombucha, because coffee kombucha depletes the culture so much. The SCOBY actually has to go on a vacation after it's made, and it gets a special treatment. It gets extra sugar. That batch gets tossed, and then I can use it again to make coffee kombucha.
And coffee kombucha is, instead of using tea, you use coffee.
It's a fermented coffee.
Interesting. I've heard of poop coffee, but I have
Oh,
not heard of kombucha coffee.
hmm
I have one of my brothers made a lot of, he's very, very determined. He like woke up, he didn't wake up one day, but he was like, I'm gonna be rich and I don't know how. And our parents are like, you're gonna go to school. And then, my younger brother and I went this college route and we're still not millionaires. He woke up every day and figured out how to sell on Amazon. And now he funds projects at like 300,000 a week kind of millionaire.
Yes.
And so one time he came home from one of his lavish vacations that, we don't get to go on because he doesn't love us that much, but he deserves to be where he's at financially for sure. But I guess he's a coffee connoisseur, so he said that there's poop coffee. Basically some random animal. I mean, he knows what animal it is. I don't, because I don't care. Eats the coffee beans.
Yeah, I have heard that. I
Yeah.
thought whenever you said poop coffee, I think fermentation, I think coffee that makes you poop.
Oh no. I mean, it does, but no.
Yeah, I have heard that. There's like a cat
Yeah.
that eats the coffee beans, and then there's a bat. They're different kinds. There's a couple different kinds of poop coffee, evidently.
And it's super expensive apparently, because he was like, you should be grateful I'm sharing this with you because it's like $60 a cup or something. And I'm like, this better be phenomenal. And I mean, it was good, but I could not get over the fact that this was at one point in an animal's intestine. It was fermented by the animal.
I mean, the coffee bean's a pretty resilient bean.
Apparently. I've never had coffee kombucha. Is there a major difference in taste, or how does?
So it very much tastes like coffee still. And it's an energy drink. The reason why I stopped bringing it to market is because it still retains all the caffeine. So on traditional tea-based kombucha, the culture eats the tea, it eats the caffeine, it eats the sugar, it eats everything. So what you have left is about as much caffeine as a decaf coffee. I use a cold brew method to make the coffee. So there's still lots of caffeine still in it, and the B vitamins, all the things that naturally give you energy in kombucha. And so there was a vendor across from my husband at one of the markets that he worked, and the guy drank the whole 60. I also sold it in half the quantity that I sell the traditional kombucha. So you can only really buy a pint of it at a time. So he drank it all, and he was like zooming all around the market. It was like, I need more of this. He was like literally shaking. no, sir, no more for you.
You've been cut off. You cannot have any more speed.
Yes. So it's an energy drink for sure. It'll wake you up.
That's interesting. So it sounds like it has a stronger effect than coffee.
It's like adding the natural energy inducing B vitamins, amino acids, organic compounds that give your body natural energy, plus a cold brew coffee caffeine.
And it tastes like a cold brew coffee for the most part.
It will have still the fermentation taste, so there's still that a little bit of tartness in it. It's like not quite a bitter, more of a tart coffee taste.
That's really interesting because I had no idea that that was a thing. I'm super excited about it. And when are you going to sell it next so I can try it?
I've been actually thinking about bringing it back and putting it on some of the shelves that I have. Magnolia Eats and Treats. I'm probably going to put it there for sure. So you'll have access to it there. That one's in the Tamina location.
Yes, that's why I haven't been seeing you on Saturdays. I go to my other farmers markets because I just get it Tuesdays on my way back home, except for today because we were meeting. So
yeah, so it'll be in their co-op corner fridge. Probably in the next couple weeks, I'm gonna bring it back.
I'm excited for that. Do you add cream to it or you just drink it straight or?
You probably could put. I always drink it straight. If you're adding any cream to it, it would probably be a small amount because of the pH. It might do a curdle thing. Maybe. I always just do it straight. Or if you want to put a little vanilla in it or something like that.
I make my own vanilla. And so it's basically vanilla in vodka. Would that make an issue for the kombucha?
No, I don't think so.
Awesome. That's how I'm going to drive to work every day from now on. It will give me the energy I need for my kids.
There you go.
And are there different...
I have a question about, so whenever you make the vanilla with the vodka, does a lot of the alcohol, the actual alcohol, evaporate? Or is it as if you're drinking like a shot of vodka?
If I was to just drink it, so one time I put it in my coffee, not thinking, and my husband takes a sip of it and he's like, "Did you spike my drink?" I was like, "No." And he's like, "Seriously, did you spike it? Because it tastes like vodka." Like he's like freaking out over it because he wasn't expecting it. And I was like, "I put some of my vanilla in it and my vanilla is vodka. So I guess yes, but not like with the intent of anything malicious." And then he's like, "I was just very confused to wake up at 8 o'clock with vodka tasting coffee." So yes, but if you bake it, like, because I've baked it in things and you can't taste, that will evaporate. But like on its own, it does not.
Okay. So if you're driving, maybe a small amount.
A small amount, yeah. But you know what? I work with sped kids, so maybe I need that extra tipsiness. I don't know. I'm just kidding. I've never drank on the job. Never. However, sometimes I've definitely needed a glass of wine upon coming home after dealing with all the craziness. No, I actually really love my job. They keep me on my toes. That's how they help me prep for the zombie apocalypse, is if you can dodge a table, you can dodge anything.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And always approaching something from a different perspective. Because they sometimes have different ways of thinking about things.
They do. most of the time I find out by them throwing something. Not all of them are nonverbal. A lot of them are. But now this year I have 3-year-olds. Last year I didn't. So yeah, this year I have to guess the perspective because I'll get bit. Yeah, I'll get jumped on, which is fun. I have one student, he's hilarious. When he wants attention, he just stands on the table and then looks at me. It's like, just come
Well,
grab
that's
my
better
hand
than
or something.
throwing a table.
It is better than throwing a table. Yeah. That was last year,
Gets
the
your
fifth
attention
graders. Yeah,
because he's taller. Gets your attention.
exactly. So it's funny. I love it because I love figuring them out and helping them acclimate to the educational environment. So, I mean, either way, they're fun and they do think differently. So I think that's why I like them a lot. It keeps me mentally stimulated, that's for sure. Unlike Gen Ed kids, they're
Yeah.
so boring. But is so then you were saying like about the vitamins and stuff with the coffee kombucha. I'm assuming it's different for the tea kombucha, and does that just have to do with the liquid like coffee versus black tea or
So it's actually the bacteria break down the tannins and the sugars in both tea and coffee to create those component parts. Like, so a B vitamin is essentially a type of amino acid. So whenever you're taking the big pieces, the bacteria kind of dismantle it, break it down, eat it, and make it into something else. So that it's in both. So you'll get that in traditional kombucha and in coffee kombucha.
That's interesting because I've had kombucha. I mean, like, literally, I will fill this up with your kombucha and it does not cleanse me, so
You've
I'm
got a good
disappointed.
gut.
I'm just kidding. Yeah, I do. I'd say I have all the ferments. I have my pickles, I have my sauerkraut, I have your kombucha. Heck, I'm sure my kombucha would have cleansed me out better than yours because who knows what was in it. But um yeah, I haven't it I I don't know, maybe I do feel an energy boost, but I don't realize it versus coffee because usually what I would do is I need to buy more of your kombucha, but what I typically do is I'll have my coffee in the morning and then in the afternoon, I fill this up with ice and then fill it up with the kombucha. And for me, I like the bubbly taste. So I used to be addicted to Coca-Cola, and then I switched to like the bubble water. And then I switched to kombucha if I want some more soda-y like. I mean, now that I don't drink soda, it's not a huge shock to my taste buds. But so like, I don't know. I don't feel the energy boost is what I'm saying, I guess, in a lot of words. Is that normal? Am I just weird because I always drink kombucha or
You might be desensitized to it, having it on a regular basis. It could be that.
Mm.
Like my mom can drink coffee and go right to sleep. Whereas if I'm more sensitive to B vitamins. So I take vitamins for different reasons. And if I take a B vitamin or drink kombucha after dinner, it affects me being able to get to sleep because I'm more sensitive to the B vitamins. So it might be a sensitivity or desensitivity.
That's interesting because I do get vitamin B12 shots often. And that was because I used to be fatigued and now I'm not, and I assume it's the shots. So,
So it might just be that you're already getting those vitamins in other places, and so your body's using it appropriately as opposed to it being a push. Maybe.
interesting.
Everybody's body's a little different.
That's true. But there is more caffeine, I guess, in the coffee kombucha
Yes.
because
Mhm.
it's not being eaten.
Correct.
That is so interesting. how in one setting it isn't being eaten, and then in the other setting it is.
So it is, but there's just significantly more caffeine in the initial product. So if you're looking at the caffeine level in tea versus a cold brew coffee, like there's a giant difference in the starting amount of caffeine.
I get it. Okay. So it's still eating the caffeine. It's just there's so much more.
Mhm.
Got it. That's so interesting. I'm still flabbergasted by the leather and the coffee. I had no idea any of these things existed until now. And I'm like gonna get off of here and just like go research a bunch of things and then start making things. And my husband's gonna be like, "What's wrong with you? Who are you talking to? It needs to stop. No more leather." That's funny. So my last question for you is, what is your favorite flavor to make?
My favorite flavor to make is the dreamsicle right now. Because it's orange, it's vanilla, and it smells wonderful. Ginger has the most fragrance, but I don't enjoy making it because I hand grate the ginger, and so it's essentially gloved up hands and a grater. I've explored lots of different ways to make it, and the way that it comes out the best is doing it that way. It's a labor of love. So, favorite is going to be the dreamsicle.
And that is the one that is at the Magnolia Treats, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what it's called. I just know where to go.
Yes. Um, it so it's Magnolia Eats and Treats. It started out as a candy shop, soda shop vibe, but then they've started adding other things, and now I think it's kind of evolved into a burger shop. They make amazing burgers, like really unique craft burgers. I love Jenny. Everything she touches is gold.
I haven't eaten there. I've just bought the gluten-free, and
Hmm.
I can't have beef or pork. So
Hmm.
my
They have a big gluten-free menu,
oh,
and they do it actually right because a lot of places they say they're gluten-free, but they use the same fryers. They have a dedicated fryer, so they have gluten-free tater tots, they have gluten-free hot dogs. I don't know if their hot dogs are chicken or pork, but they have a whole gluten-free menu as well. A lot of people are super excited about that.
I'll have to check it out then. That's exciting. Because it's hard to like eat out for me because I'm so restrictive,
Mhm.
which is probably why I try crazy things like kombucha and
Mhm.
sauerkraut. So going back to some ancient roots that I have, I guess. I don't know. Just
Well,
it's
those are
been
good for you though.
yeah, so I don't know if like my body is just craving it. And so, here I am with, 5 gallons worth of whatever ferment I want to make throughout the year. But it's a fun and exciting journey, and I am happy that you were able to come on tonight. Do you
Oh,
have
it's great.
do you have an Instagram page?
I have Instagram and Facebook. You should be able to see both under Mad Scientist Kombucha. I don't know if you can see Mad Scientist Kombucha.
Mad Scientist and then just kombucha, which is Kombucha, right?
Yes.
Awesome. I will definitely add your information to the bottom. But Heather, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.